Hi everybody. Have you ever wondered why in some families brothers and sisters look absolutely the same and in other families they look completely different? Well, in this video we're going to look at how inheritance works. The study of heredity and variation in organisms is called genetics, and it all started with this guy called Mendel and his experiments and his experience with growing pea plants. Yes, pea plants. He planted tall plants and he planted short plants, and he noticed when the two of them were crossed, all the offspring, all the seed he planted ended up growing tall. This confused him, so what he then did is he took all these tall plants, he self-pollinated them, and the seeds that he got, he planted them and saw that for every 3 tall plants, 1 short plant grew. This made Mendel realize that there's something that gets passed from a parent plant to the offspring plant, but he had no idea what this was. We now know that this unit of inheritance, the something that Mendel discovered, is called a gene, and it is a section of a DNA strand. So genes are responsible for the transmission of hereditary characteristics. So if we think about the pea plants, in Mendel's case, what you're actually looking at is 2 variations of the same trait. So some pea plants grew tall and some grew short, and this trait is found in the genes. Now, in sexual reproduction, you actually have 2 genes, or 2 possible genes, for 2 possible variations for a certain trait. So in pea plants, there were a tall trait and a short trait, and each plant would have 2 genes, one that came from mom and one that came from dad. Okay, so let's explain in terms of genetics what exactly happened in Mendel's experiment. Now in pea plants there are 2 variations for the trait height. We call these variants alleles. So in peas there's a tall allele and a short allele. So when a plant was crossed, a tall plant was crossed with a short plant, all the offspring were tall. So in this way we know that the tall allele or the tall gene is dominant while the short one is recessive. So to make it easier to write down, we allocate symbols to the genes. Any letter of the alphabet is used to represent the trait. A capital letter is used for the dominant gene, while a small letter is used for the recessive gene. So the tall gene in Mendel's experiment is represented by a capital T, while the short gene is represented by a small t. Now remember we said that for every trait in your body you've got 2 genes, one from either parent, one from mom, one from dad. So in a tall pea plant you'd also have 2 genes for the trait. You either have 2 big T's or a big T and a little t, and for a short plant you'll have 2 little t's. Now that means this: when Mendel crossed a tall plant with a short plant, and we draw a square like this called a Punnett square, we can explain why all the offspring were tall. Let me draw it from scratch to show you how I got to this diagram. So we say that Mendel crossed a tall plant with a short plant. Now the tall gene we know is dominant. That's why we give it a capital T. The short gene is recessive. That's why we give it a little t. Now, big T dominant means the gene is strong. It'll always be expressed. A little t means the gene is not that strong. You only see it expressed when there's not a big T present. So with Mendel's experiment, in order for a plant to be tall, it has to have a big T, that gene, and either have both of them big T's or big T, little t. Remember, every trait there's 2. You got one from your mom, one from your dad. So to be a tall plant, you either need to have 2 big T's as genes, or you could have a big T and a little t. We will not see the little t expressed. We will not see the plant grow short. We will see it grow tall because of the presence of this gene that is dominant. But for a short plant, in order to be short, it cannot have a big T at all. Otherwise, it would have been tall. So this plant will have two little t's in its genome or in its cells. So what Mendel did is he made sure he crossed a plant like this with a plant like that. So how we do that is by drawing a square and subdividing it into 9 little blockies. And what we do at the top is these 2 blockies over here represents the gametes from one parent, and these 2 blocks would represent the gametes from the other parent. So that means if this tall plant with a big T, little t undergoes meiosis, that some of the ovules will get big T's and the other ovules will also get big T's. So all the gametes produced through pollen or ovulation, oogenesis by meiosis in a tall plant will just have big T's. It doesn't ever have little t's in a big plant. The short plant, however, when it forms ovules or pollen grains and then sperm, all of them will receive little t's. And what we do then is we'll see if this pollen grain fertilizes that ovule. The seed that forms will actually have a big T and a little t. So the big T comes from the one parent, the little t from the other parent. If this pollen grain and that ovule fertilizes, again, we'll have a big T and a little t. If this pollen grain and ovule fertilizes together, little t, big T, little t. So in that way, these 4 blockies over here that we have over here, these represent the possible offspring. And now with Mendel's first crossing a tall plant with a short plant, all the offspring received this combination. So all the offspring had in their cells a big T and a little t. Now, what does this plant look like? So a big T, little t, although this combination we call the plant's genotype, because that's what the genes look like, the physical appearance of this plant is actually tall. It does carry the little t, but the plant doesn't look short. It's just a carrier of the short gene. That's why in this cross, Mendel actually saw that all the offspring were tall. The little t didn't disappear. It's just being carried over, and you'll see it in the grandchildren, but you don't see it in this first generation, which we call the F1 generation. So the big T, little t, or big T, little t, these symbols we call a plant's or an organism's genotype, what the genes look like. Whether it's tall or short is its phenotype, its physical appearance. If you look at this diagram again, you'll notice that both the short and the tall parent is called homozygous, while the offspring are called heterozygous. The term homozygous simply means the same. So if both the symbols are capitals or small letters, we say that the genotypes are homozygous. The term hetero means different, which means if the genes look different, one capital, one small, you'd say the genotype is heterozygous. If you look at Mendel's second generation cross, he took the 2 tall plants from the first generation and he crossed them. Now these parents were heterozygous. They looked tall, but they carried the short gene. And that's why you get the offspring where some are tall and some are short.